and welcome to this week's episode of Women's Health Unwrapped, a show dedicated to empowering women like you to unlock the true secrets to health and vitality. I'm Nicola Fandel, and I'm here unwrapping what healthy living really means so that you in midlife and menopause can create a life that is truly vibrant and one that enables you to live long and strong, because that's what we're all here for, isn't it? Now, this week is a guest expert, and it's such an insightful conversation. It's a topic that I 100% know is going to resonate with each and every one of you. We're talking about boundaries and what boundaries are, because they're not just what you're going to think they are. I know you're going to go straight to, I have to tell people no. This is much, much more than that. So I'm joined by the fabulous Courtney Townley, who just speaks in such an inspiring and motivating way. She really has this unique just voice and tone and way of explaining everything so that it really hits you. We talk together about stress in your stress bucket and why you start to get these holes in your bucket as your hormones shift in perimenopause and menopause. We talk about nourishing yourself and why in midlife you need to really hone in on solid foundations of health and well-being, who you are, what matters to you, what your values are, because you really need, as she explains in her house renovation analogy, those solid foundations in place. We dive into what health means to you and why this is such a powerful question to ask yourself. And of course, Courtney wraps up with her 3 simple steps that you can take and implement to help you put more boundaries in place. So I guarantee there will be something in this conversation for you to take on board, to implement, to build a new healthy habit around, to improve your health and well-being. So get ready for this brilliant conversation with Courtney. Hi, Courtney. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nicola. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here because I know this is such a juicy topic, lots to get into. But before we do, I'd love to just ask you what your most impactful healthy habit is in your toolkit right now.
Oh, my most impactful healthy habit. I would say at this stage of my life, it's simply like self-inquiry, like taking time to just get to know myself, listen to myself, ask myself some good questions, because I don't think I did that for the first probably 40 years of my life. And so the consequence of that is, I get largely influenced by culture, by other people's opinions, by all the shoulding and coulding out in the world. And it just really led me astray. And so coming back to myself and really kind of asking myself some pointed questions has proven to be probably one of the most nutritious things in my life.
Oh, I love the way that you've just put that there at the end, nutritious things. That sounds fantastic. And I'm totally with you in that I spent, I think, 45 years of my life not asking what I needed and who I really was. And yeah, I think I was wondering that stuff, but I just didn't get intentional and give myself any space to dig into it. And so do you find that you have any particular practice that helps you to, bring that to life each day, like in the small habits that you have?
Yeah, I think for me, it's, it can look a little bit different depending on the season and what else is going on in my life. But, I know not journaling is not for everyone, but for me, it's one of the things that I resisted the most in my life. Like I never wanted to do it. It just seemed like, why would I journal? I know what I'm thinking in my head.
Yeah.
But when you put pen to page, when I actually became consistent about it, I started to see that there was so much happening in my brain that I wasn't consciously aware of. And so that was eye-opening. And I started to see patterns, right? And when you see patterns, you get to question the patterns. Like, why do I keep thinking that way about this thing? And why am I choosing to place this meaning on that? Because obviously our thoughts are optional and we don't necessarily have to think a certain way about things. And I think thoughts were very revealing to me about what was depleting me and what was actually nourishing me. So
Yeah.
journaling is a big thing for me. I would say it kind of looks different. Sometimes I'll spend a lot more time on it than, and sometimes I'll write on the back of a napkin in a restaurant, just to, the dosage is different all the time. But I think that practice has been probably one of the most transformational for me.
Incredible. And I'm nodding along because I've tried journaling many different times in different ways.
Yeah.
And a bit like you said, it's been one of those habits that I know the power of, but I've struggled and resisted almost towards it as well. But when I do it, it is so powerful. And it's something just very recently I've been thinking about and trying again in a different way and so on. So yeah,
Well, and
that's
I think there's
really
like a lot of different
insightful.
ways of getting to the same goal, right? Like I always think of coaching. I'm a coach, you're a coach, yes. I mean, I think the coaching is a form of a verbal download. And
Yeah.
so it can have a similar effect. And so when a client, when I see a client is really resisting journaling, I don't push it because I know that she's processing by way of working with me. But
Yeah.
there comes a point where obviously we're not going to be working together. So I want her to have tools where she can still do that processing. And journaling just is, I think, one of those for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. And actually, I think this leads us nicely to the first question that I wanted to start off with as we dig into the topic of boundaries and self care. You talk about something called the renovation years when it comes to midlife. And I'd love to know why you've termed or coined it that.
So I always share the story that when my husband and I were first married, 20 some years ago, we were desperate to get our first home. And we didn't have a big budget. And so the things that we were looking at they needed a lot of work. And I remember walking into one home in particular, and from the outside, it was just awesome. Like it had so much potential. I was so excited about it. We walked in the front door, and you could literally feel yourself sinking into the ground. Like the house was imploding. And I looked at my husband and I was like, oh, honey, like we just, we can paint the walls, we can replace the windows, and it'll be great. And my husband, who's a builder, looked at me like I was insane. And he was like, honey, painting and new windows on a house that's imploding is not going to solve the problem. And having worked with the midlife population for so many years, I just think it's such a great analogy for how a lot of women are trying to go about improving their health at midlife. They need healing at the level of their foundation. And yet, where they are kind of conditioned to focus is just fixing the outside of their body, right? Look more fit, build more muscle. I'm not saying those things can't be useful. But I think for most of the women I've worked with in my career, the healing goes much deeper. And we have to really start rebuilding from the foundation for them to live in a resilient, sturdy home. And so to me, that's a lot of renovation work. It's just looking around at our life at midlife and saying, there's things that I'm so proud of. I've maybe built a career or a family, or I have a certain circle of friends. Like undoubtedly, everybody has things that they're celebrating at midlife. And we also look around at midlife and we think, I'm not sure that's working for me anymore. Right? Or I don't really like the way that looks anymore, or I want to shift something around. And that to me is the real work of health. I know we make it all about diet and exercise, like the wellness industry loves to focus on that. And as someone who's been in that industry for most of my career, of course, movement and food is a big part of our health. But renovating your life to really nourish you on every level is really the game of health. And it's not just exclusive to diet and exercise. It's your relationships, it's your career, it's, how you think about rest, giving yourself permission to rest, how you think about yourself, all of those things, how you set boundaries or don't.
Yeah, I was just going to make a note there. I love that phrase that you used about nourishment. And I'm totally with you on all of that. We're in this very noisy, chaotic space when it comes to health and wellness, and certainly the health of women, where it is usually perceived to be what we see on the outside, as you said, the way we look, the number on the scales. I talk
Yeah.
about this a lot. And it still is a journey that I'm on to, be more self-compassionate and supportive so that I can navigate my changes physically through my perimenopause season of life. But so many women are just fixated with eating less, moving more. That's going to fix everything because you're going to look better.
Mhm.
So whatever it is you're searching for, confidence, self-worth, happiness, a better relationship with your partner or
Yeah.
different job, eh, they think it's going to come from just that piece of the puzzle.
Mhm.
But as you said, it is so much more. And I love that analogy of the house renovation. And this links back to what you've just shared about your most impactful habit, because it is really about understanding that you need to be solid at your core in terms of who you are, your values,
So
what
true.
matters to you, what you want, all of that, isn't it? So, yeah, you and I, when I've looked online at your content and messaging, and you have a brilliant website, by the way, it all totally resonates with where I come from on this, because yeah, we need women to shift away from that really narrow scope of what health is, because actually for some women, many women, I would say, that focus only on diet and exercise is actually detrimental to their longer term health if they are obsessing about it and going about it in the wrong way, which
Yeah.
is the case for some and many women.
Well, I think it's diet and exercise are tools, and like any tool, it can be abused and it can be misused.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of the game, really, when it comes to health, is stress management. Like, that is like managing our stress is the ultimate skill. And I'm sure you've heard this analogy before, but thinking of stress as a bucket, right? There's a lot of different things in our life that are causing stress to fill that bucket. It's not just lack of exercise and what you're eating. It's how you're resting or not resting. It's how you're thinking about your life. It's the quality of your relationships. It's the environments that you spend time in. It's your sense of purpose or lack thereof. And all of those areas have the ability to contribute to the level of fullness in that bucket. Most women that I work with at midlife have overflowing buckets of stress. And then to make it even harder, their bucket has holes in it, because perimenopause and menopause is basically challenging the integrity of their bucket. Because when we lose estrogen and progesterone, we are not as resilient to stress as we once were.
Yeah.
So we have all this overflowing stress, all this overflowing, bucket fullness. And then we also have a bucket that can't really even support the level of stress. And so I always think of stress management at midlife, or any stage of life really, as kind of a twofold equation. Number one, we have to remove unnecessary stressors. Unnecessary stressors are things that just they're not helping your life in any way. So negative self-narrative, it's not useful, right? Eating food that your body doesn't recognize as food, not useful. So there's thousands of unnecessary stressors. So as we start to unpack those, the bucket starts to get less full. But simultaneously, we have to be leaning into stressors that help to fortify our bucket.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be strength training the body, right? To build resilience from the cell on a cellular level. We have to learn how to set boundaries. We have to learn how to talk more nicely to ourselves. And any kind of new practice is going to feel a little bit stressful, but it's a good kind of stress. It's called eustress, right? Eustress is the stress that helps to fortify us. And so it's removing unnecessary stress and simultaneously leaning into intentional stressors. Mm-hmm. And if we can kind of focus on those two things, we will naturally, as a byproduct, become healthier humans.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a clear analogy to think about it in that way. So leading into boundaries, then, as you said, that's one of the stresses that you can start to bring into your toolkit. So habits of implementing those boundaries to help you be more resilient, to navigate the stresses that are going to come up in life, being late from work, like a big traffic jam. And as you said, hormones change so much in how we feel and perhaps go about our lives as well. So to kick us off on boundaries specifically, how do you describe boundaries?
Yeah. Well, in so many ways, but I will say this first. I think at the most fundamental level, boundaries are guardrails. So I live in Montana, which is a very mountainous place in the world. And there's guardrails on so many of our mountain roads to prevent people from unnecessary devastation, right? Like driving off the road. And I think that's what boundaries do. They help us to stay on a path that is in line with our own standards and values. And there are also guardrails for our true resource availability. And what I mean by that is, especially at midlife, we do not have the same amount of resources on board as we did 10 years ago, right? We don't have as much energy. We're not quite as resilient. I'm not saying those things can't be improved, but they're definitely challenged with the drop in hormones. And so boundaries help us to make sure that we're only committing to things that we truly have resource availability for. But I also like to think as boundaries as relationship fortifiers. Because when you set boundaries, a lot of people think of boundaries, they feel guilty about them, right? Like I shouldn't set a boundary because so-and-so is going to be upset with me. But really what boundaries are is they're an act of love and respect for yourself and for the relationships that you're in. Because if you care about the relationships, you want them to be healthy. And they can't be healthy if you don't let people know who you truly are.
Mm-hmm.
And we let people know who we truly are by telling them what's okay and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. I also think of boundaries as fertilizer for authenticity, right? That they really allow us to show the world who we truly are. And they're also a practice. Everything is a practice. Boundaries are a practice. So I hear a lot of women say, oh, I'm just terrible at boundaries. I don't set boundaries. And I say, okay, well, that's not set in stone. That's just what you've been practicing for the first half of your life. Is that useful to you? And when I ask them that question, 9 times out of 10, they're like, well, of course it's not useful to me. Okay, so let's start practicing a different choice. And that's where it gets intimidating because they go to like the hardest scenario of setting boundary. Like let's say they have a contentious relationship with a coworker. Thinking of setting a boundary with that person feels really overwhelming because there's a lot of emotional charge to it. So I always invite people to start a practice with the easy things. Like put your phone in, like turn off your phone during dinner time. Don't check your inbox first thing in the morning. When someone gives you the wrong order at a coffee shop, go back and ask for what you actually ordered. Like those are easy gateways to start verbalizing what you truly want and need. And then with more practice, it gets a little easier to go after the bigger stuff. But we have to kind of titrate our entry into boundary setting as a practice. Otherwise, we just totally overwhelm our brains.
I'm so pleased I asked you that question because you've given so much clarity around it. And that's what I wanted to try to get at was what you think of them as and how you explain them. Because I think a lot of women do automatically assume a boundary is only in relation to someone else, you know, that you're putting this space, distance kind of thing towards somebody else. But you mentioned there, for example, not using your phone at the dinner table or not checking your emails first thing on a morning. And there are all of these kinds of things that you talked about, which could be going into our bucket, piling up the stress, and given that we aren't as resilient and able to adapt and adjust to the kind of stresses we've certainly got in today's modern world, like we can't afford to keep doing that, can we? And you talked a lot there as well around how we're not used to saying no or telling people what we need and so on. So how do you find like women feel about starting to perhaps do that for the first time in their lives? And one area I especially would love to kind of touch on is family, because I think we all have not just the contentious co-worker, but people in our own families, possibly parents or siblings, that, you know, we have these challenging relationships with that maybe need some boundary setting applying to.
It's so true. So I'll answer that like on 2 different levels. I think the first thing is understanding that something like starting to build a practice of boundary setting, what you're doing is you're learning how to establish a new habit, right? Which you talk a lot about. And so that is literally like the exercise you're entering is I want to show up a little differently than I have been. I understand the value of boundary setting. And so now I'm committed to practicing. And baked into any level of practice is, of course, neuroplasticity, which is how our brain makes something a habit. And I always like to explain kind of the this analogy of how neuroplasticity works, because I think it gives us a lot of grace in the messiness of practice. So when you first start setting a boundary, like the very first time you go to the Christmas dinner and you're like, nope, this time I'm just going to hold my ground a little bit, compassionately in a loving way, but I'm going to toe the line a little bit. It feels terrifying. It's a lot like going into the woods and trying to kind of carve out a new trail where no trail has ever existed. It's so much work because you have to manage your brain and you've got to think everything through. And then you kind of question, am I going the right direction? Am I doing this the right way? But you go back to another family event and you keep practicing. And eventually that trail in the woods starts to become kind of a dirt path because you're actually practicing walking it more. And so boundary setting, while it's still challenging, you're doing it with a little bit more ease, with a little bit more confidence. You're getting some really great evidence that it's actually useful to your life. So you keep practicing. You keep going to family events and you keep speaking up about the things that, are okay and not okay for you. Again, in a loving way, right? The energy behind it matters a lot. Eventually, that dirt road or that dirt path becomes a paved road. So paved roads are much easier to travel. It's getting so much easier now because I have all this practice behind me. And eventually that paved road becomes a super highway, right? So we're doing it without even having to think about it now. That's what a habit is. A habit is a reaction to something that you have practiced so many times that you can do it without having to think. So we have to be willing to get into the arena and be messy and imperfect and keep practicing anyway. That's 101. The other part to it is we cannot take responsibility for other people's emotions around what is important to us. So it doesn't mean I don't care about the other person. It means that I love myself and this relationship enough to have this difficult conversation with you. How you choose to interpret it and how you feel about it is your work. You don't have to say that verbally, but you have to, for yourself, not assume the responsibility of that person's emotional labor. Because guess who doesn't benefit from you having boundaries? Other people, right? People don't want you to have boundaries because that means that they have to change the way they're behaving too. So expect a level of discomfort, expect a little bit of friction. But people will ultimately, if they truly love and care about you and they want the best for you, they will come around. And if they don't, I think it's an incredible filter for who should be in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so people pleasing plays into this, doesn't it? Because again, lots of women are born people, or I shouldn't say born, they're created to become people pleasers through childhood. And this is something I know through my work a lot of women really struggle with. And I talk about how, generally we can juggle all the balls, we can keep them up in the air, we can just about keep going until our hormones start to change in perimenopause. And as you said, we aren't as resilient, we're perhaps more fatigued, our moods are shifting faster, less emotionally regulated, and so on and so on. And so those balls that we were just managing to keep juggling start to crash down. And, I think we can see that we're doing and giving a lot to other people, whether it's children, young or older children, parents, siblings, friends, family members, neighbours, whoever it might be. How do you feel and kind of talk about this people-pleasing aspect that does pull so many women down?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the renovation years. This is a big part of renovation because I think what a lot of women realize at midlife is I can continue trying to please all the people around me, which, by the way, you're never going to do. There's a quote that says you can be the juiciest peach in the world and there's still going to be somebody who doesn't like peaches, right? So, I mean, that is a thing. You can't possibly please everybody, but man, you can work really hard to keep doing that work. But here's what we start recognizing at midlife and why it's such a gift is the cost of continuing to people please is self-abandonment. Period. Because basically what people pleasing causes us to do is morph ourselves into something that we're not, to make someone else okay with our presence. And there is so much what I call integrity pain that comes from that. So integrity pain is that very real internal friction from living life in a way that is completely misaligned with how you want to be showing up. And people pleasing is an awesome pathway to integrity pain because we show up in all the ways that other people expect us to be while not actually being true to ourselves. And I think that because we have such low resource availability at midlife, most of us get to a point where we're just not willing to tolerate it anymore. I don't have the energy to keep expending on this. So I'm either going to brave starting a new practice and showing up in a more authentic way and risk disappointing some people because you will, or I can continue down this path of being inauthentic and resentful, and it's going to cost me my health and happiness. To me, there's no choice there. Like the choice is clear. So I think it's having that reckoning with ourselves of what it's costing us to continue to people please and not set boundaries. And here's the thing, like boundary setting doesn't have to be confrontational, right? It can be really loving and so respectful. And in fact, I would recommend that you don't actually set a boundary unless you can speak from a place of respect and kindness to the other person, because they won't hear it, right? If we come at people with a lot of intensity and high, built up energy, it causes their nervous system to freak out, and then they're going to push back. So sometimes we need to sleep on it. We need to take a week, or we need to take some time away from the person to kind of get ourselves grounded before we can go back and say, hey, I've been thinking about this. And I've just decided that, if our conversations get to a point where it's getting disrespectful, I'm going to remove myself from the conversation in the future. That's a boundary.
Yeah.
Right? And here's the thing, like with boundaries too, a big part of them is you have to honor your own boundaries. I think you mentioned this earlier, how you were, when we were talking about not checking your cell phone first thing in the morning or not checking your email, those are boundaries with yourself, right? And how many women do you work with who struggle to maintain boundaries with themselves?
Oh.
It's like all the women I work with. And when you can't maintain boundaries with yourself, there's a dissonance when you expect other people to respect your boundaries, right? There's an incongruence there.
Yeah.
And so learning how to honor your own boundaries actually helps you in the long run to be more confident in setting boundaries with others. But so often I see women trying to do the opposite, right? They're so hyper-focused on maybe trying to set boundaries with others while breaking every boundary they've ever had with themselves. So sometimes I think the easiest place to start is actually doing our own work, right? Knowing where our own limitations are and maybe where some self-discipline needs to be applied. And I know not everybody loves the word self-discipline, but to me, discipline is really born out of self-respect and self-love. That's the kind of discipline I'm talking about. It's just the ability to manage your thoughts and emotions and behaviors to live in congruence with what you truly want.
Totally agree with that. And I love how you've positioned that with self-respect rather than being really disciplined. And like you, a lot of the women that I work with have perhaps started to try to make changes, but are just so lost because they haven't done that foundational work to really dig into who they are, what their own values are, what matters to them. And, perhaps it is the hormonal changes, or it's just a combination of everything that's brought them to a place where they are perhaps going at it quite hard with this has got to stop and this person must not do that and I need to get them to change this and whatever it is. But as you shared there, they're missing the piece around themselves and what do they need. And that clarity, as we both said at the beginning, is something that most of us don't have because we're not taught to do that. We aren't brought up to regularly reflect on who we are as humans and what matters to us and so on and so on. And so that piece of work really needs to happen first, as you said, with the foundations in the house example, in that analogy, going back to those foundations. And so you talk also around self-care and what self-care really is, and this link to it being respect for you and so on. So I'd love for you to just share a little bit about how that ties into some of these ways that you can begin to appreciate boundaries and feel what they're giving back to you when you do put them into place.
So one of the first things when I work with a client that I ask them is what health means to them at this age and stage of life. And the reason I think that is such an important question is because most women have never stopped to ask themselves that question in their whole life. They've just been influenced by a lot of outside voices telling them they should look a certain way, they should lift a certain way, they should eat a certain way, they should sleep a certain way, right? Like it's all this information coming at us that we're trying to keep up with. We're trying to keep up with all these external standards. We're trying to outsource our vitality. And that's not how it works. Like we have to insource our vitality. And so when I start poking at that question, what does health really mean to you? Sometimes I will get the response initially, well, it's weight loss, or it's more energy, or it's, feeling and looking better in my clothes. And so then I keep poking at that question because I know there's something that they really want to feel, and I want to get to the root of that. So I just keep asking why. Why is that important to you? Well, because when I feel good in my clothes, I go out and I show up in the world differently. Okay, well, how do you show up differently? Well, I ask for what I need and I go after the things I want and I just live bigger. Well, why is living bigger important to you? Well, because I only have so much time on this earth and I want to make the most of it. Okay, that's a compelling reason.
Yeah.
Right? So we keep poking until I can just see, you can see the light bulb go on where they're like, oh, that's what it's about for me. And the answers are wide and varied. I have women who just want to be able to get on the ground and play with their grandkids and keep up with their friends when they're hiking and sleep well at night and feel at peace with how they lived their day. Right? So I think really getting clear on what health means to you at this age and stage of life, and then really asking yourself, who do I need to be? Like, who's the woman, the version of me that I really need to express in the world to honor that? Right? It doesn't mean you have to become a totally different person. It just means that there's probably some things you're doing that are actually keeping you from that vision. So what might you need to change in your life in order to show up more as that version of yourself? And that's where boundaries start coming in. Because you start seeing that, oh, I can't stay up and watch the 14th episode of my favorite Netflix show if I want to get up early in the morning and go for a walk. Right? Or I can't, I can't keep spending money on whatever the thing is that you're spending money on if I want to be able to spend more time with my family and not be stressing out about money. So I think there's a lot of ways that you start to find the gaps when you're really clear on where you want to go. That's what health is to you. And also, where am I currently right now and what needs to be filled in the middle, right? What are the things I need to start doing and stop doing? And then your boundaries will be informed from there. Who do you need to spend less time with? Who do you need to spend more time with? Maybe that's yourself, right? It's not necessarily other people. What are some things that need to be expressed? Is it art? Is it something that you need to say? Is it something else you need to create? And again, all of those things are going to require time and energy, and time, energy, and mental bandwidth are very limited resources at midlife. We only get so much. So knowing that you have a limited resource, how do you want to spend it in a way that keeps you in integrity with yourself, right? And keeps moving you in the direction of health, because that's all health is. Health is just a direction. It's not a destination, like we've been deluded into believing. It's not a place that we arrive at and we stay there forevermore. It's just a direction we move in. And when we find that we're lost in the woods and we've gotten a little sidetracked from that direction, we simply need to pause, ask ourselves some good questions, and reorient ourselves to the direction we intended to go. And on that note, I would just say to listeners, anyone listening right now, you can literally do that exercise in this moment by asking yourself, what is a decision I could make right now that would move me back in the direction of health? Is it drinking water? Is it just taking 5 minutes to go outside and put your feet in the grass? Is it picking up the phone and telling somebody that you're not going to be able to do something today? It's that simple, right? It can be that simple. But man, we don't
Yeah.
necessarily like simplicity because we think simple things don't necessarily work, because we're so sold on this notion that it needs to be complicated and it needs to be a lot. And yet, how's that working for you? It's probably not working for you. Or it works for you for short periods of time, and then you can't keep up with it.
And I think we've outsourced, as we've touched on, the concept of what self-care is as well, in that self-care has to be these tangible things like having a nice bubble bath with the candles on and reading a book,
Right.
or going for a facial, having your nails done. It's those kinds of things where everything you're sharing is self-care. And I feel like the boundaries and self-care are just one together. They're completely integrated, because all of the things that you'd be doing to care for yourself are around boundaries, because it's what matters to you, what's aligned to who you are, in living in integrity and intentionally and so on. And then that link to health. And again, realizing that there is no finish line when it comes to health, which isn't a negative thing. So I think a lot of people are like, oh God, so what? And I have been asked this before and recorded a whole episode on it. I was running a session for a corporate team, and over the break, a few of the women were chatting with me and said, but is it not really hard to just keep living healthy? Like, is it not a slog and an effort? And I thought was really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it in that way until they asked me that question. And I was like, actually, no, it's not, because it becomes who you are. It becomes your identity, as you've touched on with
100%.
habits and so on. But it also, it's that upward spiral in that you are thriving and you're living with vitality and vibrancy. And so you want more of it. And it was just such an interesting conversation and perception that I hadn't really thought about. But yeah, that it's a positive thing, because you're alive and you can keep progressing and taking care of yourself and moving towards that vision, and enjoying it in the moment as well, because you feel healthy and strong.
Yeah. And I think a couple reasons why people kind of, retreat from that idea that, oh, this is a lifelong process, dang it, is number one, we aren't often taught how to make it a really enjoyable process. So we want to keep doing it. And I think that requires a lot of consideration for the individual, because everybody operates differently. What I like is different than what you like. You might like taking early morning walks. I might like taking an afternoon dance class. You might love Mediterranean food while I like meat and potatoes. There's just, we have to honor the wholeness of the human. And so when women are really, I think, coached into honoring who they truly are and making decisions from the place of that authenticity, it becomes more enjoyable, which then, of course, by way of that, it becomes more sustainable. And it doesn't feel like it's so much work. It just becomes a really, enjoyable process and way of life. And like you said, it becomes your identity. And that's really the ultimate goal, is we want to make all of this a part of who we are. Otherwise, it's just a temporary fix.
Yeah. And as you touched on when you said one of the first questions you ask clients is, well, how's this working for you? What's the benefit of living this way or doing that thing? And I think that's so powerful for someone to reflect on, because we can sometimes, bring these aspects of health. I'm not going to call them habits because they're not automatic. We can do these things temporarily, like be on a diet or go to the gym, join a boot camp for 8 weeks or something like that. But it's not sustainable because of the way it's approached and how it's thought about. And, that isn't really giving you anything other than maybe some of the positive ways you feel, perhaps in the short period of time that you're doing it for. But then afterwards, you probably slide back down into that spiral where you were before, and even feel worse because you feel like you've failed. And so, there's something to be said as well for making this a part of your life. And I do talk a lot about diet and stepping away from that number on the scales and focusing on how you want to feel and strong and quality. And, I would love to be a bit slimmer than I am now. My body shape and weight's changed in perimenopause, despite eating the healthiest I've ever eaten in my life and knowing all the stuff that I know. But I know also how, how intricate our hormones and endocrine system are working at this stage of life. But I could do something drastic to try to lose that weight and feel good when I go on holiday in a few weeks' time. But then I'm probably going to be having a detrimental impact on my longer term health. So it's not better to be healthy and feel well and vibrant for the whole of your life rather than these big, peaks and dips of dipping in and out of things. Yeah.
I think too, because I think that's such a relevant challenge that women face at midlife is our bodies are changing.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we live in such a visual culture, especially with social media and all the things.
Yeah.
And I work a lot on body image with my clients, where one of the most basic practices that we work on is not thinking about your body, but learning how to be in your body. So if somebody listening right now just closed their eyes and really just dropped into their body and noticed the experience of being in their body, that would be a very different description than if I asked them to tell me about their body. Right? So if I ask someone to drop into their body and just tell me what it feels like to be a resident there, they might be like, oh, it feels kind of warm and relaxed and just sort of homey, But if I ask them to describe their body, they might be like, oh, well, I used to be 10 pounds lighter, but now I'm a little heavier and I kind of have a round belly. And it just becomes this negative self-narrative. And then of course that doesn't make us want to eat well or anything, because when we feel like hell, we kind of act accordingly. We do things to self-soothe. And self-soothing often isn't necessarily in our best interest, right? We're eating the sugar, we're drinking the wine, we're watching Netflix, all in an attempt to feel better about something that could have been avoided. I have a body that's allowing me to do life. That's pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what if right now my body just needed to be 10 pounds heavier to figure out whatever it's figuring out? Because the body is pretty damn smart, right? And it hasn't failed us to this point, but we micromanage it. We micromanage, the body. We try to control it rather than really asking it, what does it need? Maybe it just needs more rest. Maybe it needs a few extra pounds just for now. And again, I'm not saying, my company is named Grace and Grit for a reason. I work with people who use grace to the point of not doing anything. They use grace as rationale for everything. Right? So they'll say, well, I'm being graceful with myself. So I just, I ate all the cake, or I mean, that's an extreme example, but we can use grace as rationalization for not doing work. Grit, on the other hand, I kind of associate with the self-discipline piece. And I've seen a lot of women use grit to the point of self-destruction. I have been one of those women. Right? Where you're forcing the workouts and you're restricting the diet and you're just working at all hours because you're proving your worth all the time. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
Grace and grit are both very valuable characteristics, but there's sweet spots in the middle of those two. And I think that's where health resides. Right? It's not on the ends of the spectrum, but it's in the places in the center where we can be graceful with ourselves and have some really hard conversations with ourselves about where we're kind of just skimping on the work. That's the integrity piece. Really being honest with ourselves about where we're not showing up and why. And the way that I get to that answer a lot with my clients is when they tell me they haven't done something that they told themselves they would do, I say, well, do you like your reasons? And 9 times out of 10, they're like, no, I don't like my reason because it was just a cop-out. Okay, great. So what are we going to do next week to avoid that? And that's where a lot of the self-coaching and self-leadership comes in, is learning those skills of just guiding themselves. So they'll talk themselves into the work rather than talking themselves out of it.
I love that, Courtney. It's been pure gold. And I honestly believe whoever is listening just has to be inspired and take this on board. They won't be able to help themselves, but to reflect on everything you've shared. So to wrap us up, I'd love to get from you kind of 3 simple steps. Obviously, you talk a lot about neuroplasticity and building habits and how we can, do that in midlife. So thinking around boundary setting, what would be 3 steps someone can take to begin to implement some of these boundaries we've chatted through?
So I would say the very first thing is getting clear, like set a date with yourself, like for 15, 20 minutes. It doesn't have to be an epic period of time, but get clear on your priorities at this stage of your life. Like what are your values? What are your standards? What are the things that are really important to you right now in your life? And let that be a filter for some of the decisions that are going to have to be made around boundaries. It might even be that question, what does health mean to me, right? That would be a great way to enter those waters too. Like, what does health mean to me at this stage of my life?
Yeah.
And then I would say the second step is starting to practice in small ways, right? So when you answer that question for yourself and you see where some of the gaps are, where you might benefit from setting some boundaries, whether that's with yourself or someone else, how could you start the practice of setting and honoring those boundaries that doesn't feel overwhelming? There's a psychologist, Susan David. She wrote Emotional Agility. It's like one of my favorite books ever. And she talks about your state of whelm. State of whelm is when you're not overwhelmed and you're not underwhelmed, but you just feel a little bit challenged. And that's what we want to find with your boundaries when you're first starting a practice. So is it just turning off your phone after 5 p.m.? Right? Is it closing your office door when you're working so you kind of have this implied boundary where people don't walk in and disturb you? Is it having a conversation with a close friend that feels a little bit risky but also safe? Right? Like, what are the easy entry points? And then I would say the third piece is we have to parent the hell out of our brains. Because when we start a new practice, your brain goes to all these places of, I'm doing it wrong. This person's going to hate me. I shouldn't be doing this, right? Worst case scenarios. And all that does is create a lot of unnecessary stress. It freaks your brain out. And a freaked out brain is always going to say, let's stop practicing because this is a terrible idea. So that's where, again, we have to kind of coach ourselves into, nope, I know exactly why I'm doing this. I like how I'm doing it. And I expect it to be uncomfortable because it's new, but that doesn't make it wrong. Right? And then we practice it enough where we stop having to coach ourselves so much on that. So those would be my 3 for boundary setting specifically.
Yeah, and I think they're so clear as well and very easy, simple steps for someone to take, which is the whole purpose of these conversations, is so someone can take action on the back of it. So definitely pause the episode if you need to, play it back, write those 3 down or come back to it later and get started with number 1, because I think that question in itself, as you said, Courtney, is just such a powerful place to start. And certainly in my own health transformation journey, that was something, I didn't realize I was doing in that way at the time, but that was kind of where it started for me because of some of my own health problems and losing my mum quite suddenly, and seeing what she'd struggled with her health and thinking, actually, what is this about? This isn't working out. I'm not feeling good. Life isn't good. It isn't how I want it to be, but I don't really know what else I could do with it. So yeah, it's a huge but very, very empowering question to answer for yourself.
And it's such an opportunity. Like, that's what I really want people to hear is like midlife. It's frustrating because it's a liminal space. We haven't figured it out yet, but we know we're rumbling. We know that there's like things that aren't working. So we're really we're in this space of between who we've been in the past and who we want to be in the future. And we're trying to navigate the space in the middle of those 2 versions of ourselves. And it is very disorienting. And we have to experiment with a lot of different things and practice a lot of different things. Yeah. But as long as we're committed to ourselves and continuing to show up day after day, whatever that looks like on each day, you'll eventually start moving more into that future version of you. And that is everything. And it doesn't happen quickly. And there's usually a lot of stuff that we have to kind of wrestle with, to get to the other side. But when you get closer to that other side, it just starts to feel like such a relief because you feel more whole and you feel more true and you feel more powerful. And to me, that's what health is. It's that wholeness and it's that power-filled place.
Here, absolutely. And I do believe this midlife crossroads, point is an opportunity to get on the path that you want, live that second half intentionally, fully, with vitality and happiness and so on. So yeah, I think there's so much that we can all take, and I love having these conversations because it also always helps me. It's like I'm having some coaching and inspiration as well. So I appreciate that. I'm going to pop everything into the show notes for someone to connect with you. But if you just want to share, the best place for someone to reach out if they want to find out more, and I know you have your podcast as well.
Yeah. I mean, graceandgrit.com is my website, and the podcast and all the things are there. The one thing I would just really encourage people to keep their eyes and ears open for is I do have a book coming out in November. Ooh. It's called The Consistency Code, and it's all about consistent self-honoring. So it's not about consistency as doing the same thing over and over the rest of your life. It's about learning how to consistently honor yourself as life changes, because life does. And it's specifically geared towards midlife women. So I would say that would just be if somebody wants to get really down and dirty with my work in the quickest way, rather than listening to 400 episodes of a podcast, they could just read the book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love the name and the concept. That's fantastic.
Thank you. I'm really excited about it. And it's work I've been teaching. I have a course I've been teaching for years called The Consistency Code. And we just thought, we should turn this into a book because it's really digestible content. And so much of what we talked about here is just reiterated in that book.
Brilliant. And I'd love to chat with you again if you fancy an Instagram live when the book's
I would
launched,
love it. Absolutely. We can talk definitely take you up on that.
Share it. That would be amazing. I'd love to find out more about that. So thank you so much for your time and all of the valuable input and inspiration that you've provided.
I really appreciate it. And you have such an awesome platform. This is such a gift to your listeners to be having these conversations. And because I think that's what you're doing, you're normalizing a new way of approaching wellness. And I think that is just such needed work in the world. So thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.